we're back, everybody. Dr. Carla Ionescu, welcome to Awakening Aphrodite podcast. What a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
All right. I have a very important question. Did you ride your motorcycle today?
Do you know that I did?
No, but that popped in my head. Like, I'm going to ask her.
That is a weird question. Okay. So I have to move my motorcycle, and you see the snow behind me.
I
have
do.
to move it into the back shed, which is on the back of my property. And I've been sort of lazy, and we've been doing some work. Anyway, today, weirdly that you said that, I was like, I'm going to ride it across the snowy lawn and put it in the shed. It took 2 or 3 of us. My neighbor saw me struggling because it kept sliding out. It's,
Yeah, dangerous.
called somebody to come and help me. So their son came, he lives down the street, and he's like, Carla, you need a hand? And the 2 of us struggled to get this bike into this shed. Anyway, so we had it done. So isn't that interesting that you said that? So now
That's
she's
crazy.
there for the winter now. She's resting.
Yeah, because when we're recording this, it's pretty much beginning of winter, and it's big time winter. Like you said, where you are and here is absolutely freezing. I'm in New England, and yeah, we are in winter. So it'd be unusual to ride your motorcycle. But in preparing for the show, my brain was like, I just want to ask her that. I don't know why. So there you go. All right, we're in the zone.
Wow, we are. Wow.
I love it. Okay, well, like I mentioned in the intro, wow, I'm just so grateful to have found you. You're an ancient historian, an author, the founder of the Artemis Center. Your work is just fascinating. I have been enrolled in several of your online courses, and I have to say, I have been in the space in a different capacity than you, but in the space of archetypes and, the goddess and the holistic nature of the mind, body, spirit. And I've always been into like mental, emotional health, which of course takes us into archetypes and psychology. But I've never come across someone who is a teacher like you. And your delivery and just a lot of people are passionate, and your passion is obvious, but there's something about the energy, the way you explain things, the way you make it practical, because this is the struggle. As people know, I have a forthcoming course on Goddess Rising that's thriving through the 4 stages of womanhood, and which is kind of what brought me to you, because it's obviously related. But I'm always cognizant, as I'm sure you are, seems like you are for sure, of bringing it down to real life. Like we're talking about myths and ancient stories and all these rituals that are very hard for the everyday person kind of trying to put bread on the table and all that stuff. Technology to just like, why is this important in my life? Like, why am I listening to this? But I feel like, well, first of all, you have a wonderful way of bringing us into the mystery and the magic of that time and how amazing it was in the way you tell the story yourself of the story. But then you just still kind of somehow weave it back to the everyday woman in the 20th century, 21st century, whatever we're in, current time. And it's just such a gift. I truly am so grateful to have found you, and I'm excited for my audience to find you as well. So that's my long way of saying thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much for saying that. Wow. That's really beautiful. And it's so wonderful to hear because I teach a lot and I enjoy teaching, and I'm always interested in how that lands for people. And my goal is to bring people into the goddess as well and continue that interest and passion. So as you know, in some of our classes, we have people that are very familiar and
Yes.
have been in the spiritual space for a long time. And then there's people that are not familiar and this is their first time. Um and having that energy, even just on Zoom, but having that energy in the class and having those conversations is really rewarding for me as well, right? Because I'm having a good time.
Yes.
Um, and I
Comes through.
really like it when members will ask questions and they're engaged, because then you're like, oh my God, the goddess is working through all of us, and she's bringing these curiosities together and these experiences together, and it's so much fun. And that's a lot of fun for me as well. So it's very rewarding. So thank you for saying that.
and I mean it 100%. I'll tell you, we all know that someone who is enthusiastic and passionate and just totally into whatever it is they're doing, it doesn't even matter what they're doing. It's so engaging. And I just find that, it's, other people do talk about it in a way that they're interested in it, but they don't have the delivery you do. So anyway, thank you again. I'd like to start with just some clarifications for my own knowledge. How do researchers come to conclusions about what they believe is the practice? Because I know you're an ancient historian. Like, I've always been confused. There's so many different opinions, and this one, like, particularly, we're going to talk about, the famous multiple breast statue, right? And your theory, and like, how do they get? Well, not necessarily in consensuses, because often there is not a consensus, right? But there's so many different conclusions and theories. So how is there? Because I think you call it the primary source. So can you clarify all that for us to know, like, how do you guys get to a party line, so to speak, on
Yeah.
things?
So primary source historically are in the field of ancient history, archaeology, anthropology, etc., are the sources that are written in the time of which they are speaking about. So if we're talking about like Hesiod, for example, he's writing in the 7th century BCE. He's writing his own mythology, but he's also writing the history that's around him. So we call that a primary source because here's a person in the 7th century writing about the 7th century and what people of the 7th century believe in, right?
Okay. Primary
Now,
source.
the
Okay.
problem, and so that's so that's a literary primary source. So that's something that's written down. We don't have a lot of that. That's the big problem.
Oh,
Much of it was destroyed in wars and just time, and it was written on papyri, right? So that's paper that gets disintegrated really quick
yeah, you ruined. Yep.
or ruined in fires or etc.
Yep.
So we have some, but we don't have as much as there was, certainly. And so when we talk in class about primary sources, particularly literary sources, historians are a little stuck because we only have, let's say a handful of sources, and they're rich men. Even though other people wrote and women wrote, we just don't have that. I mean, we have Sappho, we have a couple of other women that wrote, but not as much. So that's literary sources. And then another form of primary source is archaeological artifacts. So things that are in museum, found in archaeological sites, temple sites, for example, though, even though they're foundations, and sometimes they have other pieces from the temple as well. So anything that could be dated to that time is also a primary source. So if we're using like a scientific language, I would call those the most agreed upon facts that historians have. Okay. But interpretation of those things, that gets a little messy because, first of all, of course, there's the issue of translation of literary sources. So we've got ancient Greek, and there's people that really, experts in translation and linguistics that still fight about a few words here and the meaning of this word here,
Sure.
which then changes, something. But I would say on average, most historians agree with the standard translations. Lately, one of the things that I really enjoy is the fact that we are now taking the time to contextualize the writer. So now if I'm thinking about Hesiod, I'm trying to think of what kind of guy was he and where did he live? What was his life like? What was his bias, intentions in his writing? You
Which
know what
is
I
so
mean?
important.
Right?
Yeah.
Um, because, a lot of ancient scholars weren't held to standards of writing. He calls himself the first historian, and he's probably right because he's the first person that's trying to be non-biased when he's writing, even though it's very clear that he has a bias. And the artifacts are have the same sort of problem. With the artifacts, it's even harder because this is where we get a lot of modern masculine Christian colonial bias where you take a statue of a female figure and then there could be a ton of interpretations from a mother to a goddess to a woman to, it depends on that person's perspective. So statues and artifacts are also being revisited. Um, again, with a little more attention on like where are they found. My biggest interest is to try and look at a statue that's been found, let's say in Athens, and then there's statues that are similar found in Braran, and statues that are similar found all over Greece, and trying to figure out, well, wow, if there's so many of these statues everywhere, what was the meaning for all of these groups of people, all of these tribes, all of these cities? Um, so that's our other primary source. Um, but as I said, what you do with that um, can get a little messy. And then there is the issue of power and repute. So if a very reputable historian and male historian in the 1800s writes something, his colleagues and his students don't really want to challenge him. And number one, and they use his work as a foundation of their work. And sometimes this causes the perpetuation of a theory that's not challenged, like for example, right? Like in
Groupthink.
Kenosis, exactly.
Yep.
In Kenosis, Arthur Evan calls it a palace. He thinks that was a palace. And now I think archaeologists finally are starting to be like, okay, that's not a palace. It's very likely a temple and the place where people lived. They didn't have palaces. They didn't have kings. Anyway, but for what 50 to 100 years, we called it and today still in the museum, they call it a palace because here's a very famous archaeologist who said it. And now to unsay it, Amy, it's going to take us 100 years.
Mhm.
So,
With a lot of pushback.
yeah, a lot of pushback.
Well, I mean, from my limited knowledge, the Bible and all the versions of the Bible are just a huge example of that, of the certain words that were completely misinterpreted. And therefore, the whole meaning of the whole point of the section or whatever is totally misconstrued. And that can have disastrous consequences. There's a big difference between, different nuances of certain words. And, we don't have to get into the Bible, but it's just full of stuff like that. So, yeah, the interpretation is what a mess. Plus, I mean, to your point that most of ancient history, well, all of it, I guess, initially was just passed on by word of mouth. I mean, we all know that famous game of telephone tag, right? Like you tell the person, the next person, the next person, and then by the time it gets to the, dozen or second dozen or so people, the original message is totally different than what's the last person receives. I mean, just human error without intent, but it just will be a different message just based on human error. Not to mention even when they got to the point where they were actually writing things down, and then we also know so much of it was destroyed. So my gosh, I mean, how could we have an accurate depiction? Plus, I mean, we're seeing this in almost every industry now anyway in 2025 that there's such resistance to any kind of pushback to the popular narrative. Like there's industries around certain groupthinks and, this is the way it is. And we don't want anyone with consenting opinions about anything, so here we go.
It's a big challenge. When I was getting my PhD, I was very excited that I would get an opportunity to study and find the answers to my questions. And what I really found was that actually no one really had answers, and that all the other experts were doing their very best to figure out the answers.
Yeah.
And then they were also consulting with other experts. And then I guess the goal for me was to become one of the experts in this field of Artemis particularly. But the sources we're working with have limitations. And so it's important. I don't know, sometimes academics don't like to talk about that. I think it's very important that we talk about it. I think in a way it's a bit liberating because it leaves it a bit more open to other possibilities as well. Like, whenever we commit to something like this is a hard truth, I always feel a little bit like,
Mm-hmm.
Good though. I mean, then I start doing the whole, I mean, who said it? When was it said?
Yeah.
So I think admitting that we're working with limited sources and that we are doing the very best we can with those sources allows people to be like, okay, yeah, I get that. That's
For
fair.
now. Like for now, this is the current belief. I mean, we all like to think we're not biased. Everyone else is. I'm right. I'm not biased. Yeah. So yeah, so you mentioned when you started your PhD, and I know I did give a little background in your intro, but I'm just curious. You said your questions you wanted answered. What were some of them that got you into?
So, well, I grew up quite religious, like, so I was born in Romania, but then it was a communist country, and my parents, um, with my brother and I, escaped when I was about 9 years old, 10 years old.
Wow.
And we grew up Greek Orthodox, but in a communist country, there's not really religion. Certainly, there wasn't in Romania too much. So when we came to Canada, my mother wanted me to, because she was always very faithful. She is still. She wanted me to learn about religion. And so, because she's Italian and had her father's Italian, and long story short, the Catholic Church allowed me to go to Catholic school. And they accepted me, in there, and I had my communion and all that. So I became quite devoted to the Virgin Mary. And when I went to university, I tried different routes, but one of my bachelor's was in religious studies, and I really wanted to learn more about the Virgin Mary and Christianity, thinking this will engage my faith and expand my faith. But of course, what it ended up doing is cracking open my faith, right? Because
Yeah.
the more you learn, the more you see the wizard behind the curtain, you know? And so I was like, okay, fine, that's fine. It took me some time to sort of wrestle with that. And then I was like, okay, so if the Virgin Mary is an adaptation um, of other traditions, let me go backwards, right? So I'm always trying to go backwards to the very original, to the very first. And every time I went backwards, I bumped into Artemis. So then for my master's degree, so in Canada, you have to do bachelor, master's, and then PhD. It takes forever. So for my master's degree, I proposed this research of the Virgin Mary and looking at her Artemisian roots.
Cool.
And that just opened up this whole world. And my master's degree was only 2 years. So my supervisors, you have a supervisor committee, was like, well, if you'd like to take this into your PhD, that would be interesting. And I like learning, So I was like, yeah, okay, let's do it. And I like teaching. And I thought, okay, teaching at the university about the goddess, that would be wonderful. So I went in and I did my PhD. And as I dove deeper and deeper and deeper, this is when I started seeing the connections of not just Mary to Artemis, but then Artemis to the Bronze Age, the Neolithic, keep going backwards, to the mistress of animals, et cetera, et cetera. And so she became Artemis. I just realized she's just this wealth of epithets and worship, and she's just so relatable to so many ancient people and modern people, and she just pulled me in, and I was done. That was it.
Yeah. Well, again, Artemis, people, my audience knows Artemis has always been Artemis and Aphrodite are the two, but Artemis is like my girl. I mean, like I'm her, like she's me. But one thing I learned from you, which I'm so grateful, and I know, I mean, not even nearly as much as you do, but I'd say I know more about her than the average person walking on the street. I learned from you that she's so much more than I even thought she was. I mean, I was aware of the different versions of her, but not to the depth that you taught us, which is just fascinating. Which is now I can see the parallels with the Virgin Mary because of her breath, and I definitely want to get into that. But if we could just put a little bookmark on that topic of the Virgin Mary, because that's very important. With the Judeo-Christian society that most of us are in. I would just like to kind of set the foundation a little bit for all of us, because sometimes I think, plus right now it's very vogue to talk about the goddess and feminine energy and all this stuff. And of course, the polarity, the toxic masculine and all the stuff going on. So I'd like to just clarify terms for all of us. Could you just explain to us, and plus I personally would love to know how you define the sacred feminine and the feminine essence of the divine, as far as how this got divided in polarities. And then, of course, that's a huge rabbit hole, right?
Yes.
So
You're
however
just
you'd
throwing
like
me.
what's that?
You're just throwing me right down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. I just threw you down the hole, and I'll look from above.
I think that's a great question. Okay. Well, I think foundationally, the sacred feminine is everything to do with feminine energy. And by that, I think I mean both the earth is feminine energy, and then the ether is feminine energy, and then the goddess is feminine energy. I think that naturally, and if we go back, further and further in the past, that we all were mostly feminine energy. And I don't know how to put this into words. That is, this idea of masculinity wasn't a priority, or wasn't really considered, or wasn't missed. Men did not feel in some way dismissed. We have lots of evidence that they worshiped the goddess. They built temples to the goddess. They were consorts to priestesses. They were, they weren't subjugated in the sacred feminine. In their worship of the sacred feminine, there was no subjugation. They might have come, maybe, I don't know, I was going to say the word secondary, but I don't know if secondary is right. There was definitely a prioritizing of the goddesses and of the priestess work with the goddess for the community. And so I think the masculinity and this sort of machismo, which is I think what people refer to when they say toxic masculinity, became more and more of a guise as we enter patriarchy, and the importance of physicality and fighting and war and toughness and don't cry and all of that comes over, the last 1,000 years. And I think that harms men as much as it harms women. Okay, more or less. So, I think what I'm finding myself lecturing, when I'm finding myself lecturing about the sacred feminine and the goddess, I am finding myself wanting to return to that time where that sacred feminine that we've now put in this section is available to all of us. Like there's and I think Artemis embodies it because she's both soft and hard, right? She's really this complex humanity. And of course, men worshipped Artemis. I mean, everyone worshipped Artemis. This was a given. And so I think the sacred feminine embodies all of that human experience. And it's probably just in our language that we've become so dual, feminine, masculine, right? Black, white, top down, this kind of thing. That was a very Greek thing, to be honest. Greeks and then later Roman, they really liked duality. They also inherited, for example, from the Zoroastrians down in the Middle East, who were also very much, they really enjoyed the system of duality. And I think it became a trend after a while. But now it seems to be in a negative way, like it's a very divisive way of speaking about a community or a culture or biology or genders, right? I'm not sure that pre-Greek people thought in dual terms.
Yep. From what I understand in my training, even like with biogeometry, the sciences, that original humans were, if not totally, they were predominantly right brain oriented. They were obviously very much more in tune with rhythms and intuition and just all of the natural cycles and different realms of consciousness. And then somehow we kind of got away from that, and the left brain started to develop more. And I'm thinking that you said that. I'm wondering, and I'd love to know, obviously, your thoughts. Do you think that might have contributed to why they went away from holism and got more into the duality? Or was it Descartes when he separated the body from the soul in medicine or something? Like, what are you thinking? Like, why in the world would we get away from that holistic I mean, we basically cut off half of our function, and we're all trying to get it back now. But why in the world would we do that?
I think I think all of that you say is possible. I think it's a very complicated story because there's so many layers of time and space where this is developing, right? And I don't think that anyone consciously moved that way.
Yeah.
Um, some people say that agriculture became an issue, city building became an issue, inheritance became an issue. And so physicality, for example, the masculine physicality to protect the land, to protect the family
Mm,
becomes more
yeah.
valued,
Makes sense.
right? We are less nomadic. We now have land that we own. We move
Yep.
away from but this happens throughout the world at different times and
Mm,
so it's very hard to really pin it down.
mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that as that trend begins, I mean, people think of that as evolution. I'm not sure that's evolution. In some ways, it could be de-evolution because
Yeah.
look at us now, like we're living in the worst of times, and we've probably done the worst of times a couple of cycles as well. Um, but I think that whatever that trend that because then people traded with each other, they traveled, so they saw, oh, that town is doing this, or the men of this place are coming to take our goods, and so now we need more men to train, and some women, because women were fighting too,
Oh, yeah.
Um, but the physicality of the body, right? The tool making, the defense of buildings. So this becomes priority, and perhaps we didn't even realize how much we were losing because again, people when they were living in, let's call it the bright brain times, they kind of took that for granted. That was their normal.
Mm-hmm.
They maybe never thought that in 10,000 years we would be so out of touch with the
Right.
stars and the moon. We'd live in concrete jungles,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd know nothing. In fact, we would dismiss astrology. We would dismiss moon energy. We'd be like, oh, that's woo-woo stuff.
And natural medicines and yeah, all that. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, it probably wasn't even conceivable. It's like that's just how it is. They weren't even conscious they were doing it because it was just the way. It's just how they were. You know what I mean? They didn't even like think of it as, oh, I'm spiritual or I'm connected to the land. It just was the way they were to live. People can't even support themselves right now. Like if we lost the power grid, I mean, it's estimated that, 90% of the population would be dead within a year because people they don't know how to grow food. They don't know how to procure clean water or God knows what else, sanitation. So, okay. So, how has learning and understanding ancient stories, myths, and rituals, as well as practices, how have you learned they can help us in modern times? Because there's so much there, right? But in general, like why do you like teaching this? Like why is this important that students should learn about all this, the ancient stories and practices?
I think it's like you say, I think we've lost touch. We're lost. Um, and knowing about the past empowers us spiritually. I'm really interested in people taking their own spiritual power back, their energy back. I'm also really interested in people gathering for rituals again,
Yeah,
which then creates this powerful energy,
so
which then you
important.
take home with you. But genuine rituals, like rituals in which the rituals that are not for profit, right? Because one could argue that you go to church on Sunday and that's a kind of ritual, and it is. But it has become, a multiplex of, I don't know, power struggle, gossip, money, etc., right? Where people don't even wanna go, they just don't feel so, I think that it's really important that we practice or know about the rituals, let's say, of our own ancestors, and then we can adapt them, like, rituals are not written in stone, right? They have to fit the community. But I didn't know a lot of my own ancestral rituals or even my own ancestral history for a very, very long time. First of all, because my country, Romania, is so layered on conquest. There's just so many people that came through. right? And that's from lots of parts of Europe. So, there were Greeks, the Romans, the Ottomans, the Russians, like everybody's coming through. And therefore, you're in a constant state of flux. You forget who were maybe the original settlers in your area. How far back can you go? And then you have to remember the layers of people living there and try and figure out what their ancestry was and how that bleeds into. So lots of complications,
Yeah.
But in doing that, in trying to undo that and learn some of our own ancestral rituals, I think that empowers us in moving forward through our spirituality, in these times of uncertainty and like so much fakeness, not just artificial intelligence, because I feel like artificial intelligence is not really that intelligent, but the fear of AI and the fear and the fakeness of everything from writing to every social media, right? So we're all in this soup, and having some history and some knowledge and some trust in the fact that people before me went through lots of ups and downs and they were connected to the divine and the divine remains with us. I hope brings people some grounding. It certainly does for me, right? Like through the goddess and through the sort of pagan community that I'm now a part of. I feel like when the panic kind of, when your colleagues or other people around you are like, "Oh my God, it's the end of days. It's third World War III. Oh, did you see what happened yesterday?" When all of that noise comes at you, you have a bit of a bubble of protection in the knowledge that like this too will pass, right? Like, um,
Mm-mm.
it's okay. Like we'll figure it out. Like if everything does go to crap, we have community that can help each other, that can grow together. Like there are positives and a bit of hope, and we all need that. And it's our right. Like it's our natural born right to connect to the divine and to practice our spirituality.
Well, I would imagine, given that you're an ancient historian and just delving into all these cultures of thousands of years ago, over time and generations, you have such a broader perspective of the human experience. It gives you that depth to feel more resilient, like we're not just well, I guess in the grand scheme of creation, we're just a snap in the wind. But you know what I mean? You have more perspective of the longevity of the human experience to give us a little more meat on our bones, rather than the person who kind of thinks of maybe their grandparents or great parents and their family tree. And it's kind of like we just don't seem as resilient, Perhaps that's part of it. So
Yeah,
that's valuable.
there's an old saying that says something like history is doomed to repeat itself and historians are doomed to watch it.
True. And hopefully get it right? All right. So has any of your work involve gods? I was just wondering if you have any kind of knowledge or perspective on the relationship with the god goddess, because I know you really studied the goddess, obviously.
Yeah, well, yes. So, as particularly in studying Artemis, part of my research is, of course, and going to the temples and doing the mapping project. I'm constantly stumbling into all the other gods in the
Right.
pantheon.
Yep.
And so knowing their relationships and their dynamics of what responsibilities they might have. Why might two of them be at this temple together and then two others are at that temple together? So yeah, learning about the gods as well, the male gods is part and parcel of doing the research on Artemis. Yeah.
And I know the whole god goddess concept is much bigger than the Greeks, obviously. But I'd love to get your perspective on something that's really bothered me is how the Greeks have Zeus as the king honcho. Okay, like that's always bothered me, like the whole, Apple and Paris and Aphrodite and how she's judged by men, judged by a mortal, no less. All that. Like, I mean, I just can't wrap my brain around a culture that had, I mean, please tell us, in your perspective, weren't the gods and goddesses somewhat equal? Obviously, different attributes, but I don't know. Just what are your thoughts on Zeus, a male god, being the most, powerful?
So I think a couple of things. I think the way that the knowledge that we have received from primary sources is, of course, the way that the Greeks and later the Romans wanted to present themselves. When I'm doing the mapping project, when I'm mapping Artemis's temples and hiking to all these temples, one of the things that's very clear is that, for example, goddesses had way more temples than gods. Yeah. That becomes very clear very quickly. And again, the temples were built by men. So it's not like, oh, this is a gender issue, right? But it seems that in the writing, the focus, because the writers are male,
Yep.
focusing on what's interesting to them, you know?
Yep.
Although I would say that they certainly give a lot of time to Athena, for example, um, as their sort of primary goddess of war. But they are really writing about what's interesting to them. And then a lot of it is, of course, battle writing and war writing, and that has a lot of male god energy. And so I think a lot of that is presentation rather perhaps that was not the lived reality of the ancients. I actually think that ancient Greek women, for example, had spent a lot more time with the sacred feminine than we do today, even
Oh
in our
God, yeah.
highest feminist, you know,
Yeah.
with radical feminist selves, we don't have access to that layer, that level of sacred feminine. And so again, we don't have any writing of all of these women that had their own festivals for the goddess. Um, and what that must have felt like. So I think a lot of it is about the presentation and the interpretation of the presentation. So we're led to believe there are so many temples, for example, where Zeus is ruling, like in Olympia, where Zeus has his greatest temple. Well, people always forget to tell you that, like, literally just 10 feet next to him is one of the largest temples to Hera. And then there's a temple to Dionysus, and there were like 200 altars to all the gods. And then so it's like, it's the skew of who's telling the story, right? Like,
Wow.
oh, yes, it's great that Zeus is here and he has this thing, but I mean, Hera's right there, and there were festivals to her, and there were visitors to her, and there were honorifics to her.
Hmm.
So I'm walking around going, I didn't even actually know.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a temple to Kaibali just down on the opposite side. I never even thought about it till I actually went to the site. We were looking for the Artemis temple, which Nero built something else on top of it. But um, then I was like, yeah, well, Hera's right here. I mean, she's right here. I mean, you could stand on the temple of Zeus and wave at someone
Mm-hmm.
right now. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so, yeah, I think a lot of that is skewed by perspective and skewed by the interest of classicists. They were interested in
Mm-hmm.
talking about Zeus and Hades and right, like that was their Dionysus and Heracles, and we didn't have a lot of women in the field who were like, I'd like to focus on all of this to balance that out. So we'll see how it goes as
Mm-hmm.
more and more of this field um, brings in people with other interests.
See, and I just can't help but think of the parallels what's going on now, even like you mentioned earlier with AI, is like there's so much of quote unquote knowledge being destroyed or construed, and because it's all going digital, and it's like, well, who's ever typing in that data and controlling the software is now what the next generation is going to believe is the truth, what actually happened. It's kind of scary. So it's kind of like repeating itself, that what's the saying, that history goes to the victors or whatever, whoever won the battle is the one who tells the story of what happened, but you don't get the other half of it. So it's really unsettling, frankly. It's like, how do you even know what to believe? Because, it's the narrative for whatever their reasons are for telling us things. So hopefully not too much has been destroyed to find out the whole story. Because like your point to Harris Temple, you need to know context, and just to know that I might not be getting the whole story. And this isn't just, solid fact per se, even if someone's intentions are good.
Yeah, I mean, people didn't know for a long time, and I don't know if people still widely know that women had their own Olympics, that they played their own
Wow.
games, that um, even at Olympia itself, they had their own competitions. Yes, women were not allowed to watch the men because the men were naked and men were not allowed to watch the women. But still, like, it feels much more like relatable when we have context and we go, well, it's kind of like us. I mean, they have, it's a different culture, but I get it. Like, I could see the humanity in the way they're living. I could see myself, much of my own values and morals and the morals of my society in that society. So, but like I said, I think maybe it's impossible to tell it all, or maybe it's a choice that they
Yeah.
focused solely on the masculine and the herofying, you know,
Yeah.
of the masculine.
Or to your point, it's just what interested them because they were masculine. But see the implications of what you just said, that women had their own Olympics. Okay, I didn't know that. But to think like if that was common knowledge, I mean, to me, that just brings women's scale up more on par with men. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if they had their own Olympics too, it's not that women are better, they're just equal. They had their own important thing. It wasn't just men. So that's important to know. And just if we think about even the subconscious implications of that for young girls growing up, like to be egalitarian a little bit more, I think is huge.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that they were like the men, but they were certainly competitive. And in fact, but again, I think that knowledge is available. It's not secret and
Okay,
it's
good.
not hidden or it's not anything. It's just you have to go looking for
It's
it.
not prominent. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember, like, when I was at the Met, I think it was at the Met, I saw this little piece, this little artifact, of 2 women wrestling. It was a bronze of 2 women wrestling, and
Mhm.
I'd never seen an artifact that represented, like, women fighting. They were holding, like, these bats, and they're kinda going at each other with these, like, it looked like bats. I don't know what they were, because the label was very minimal. But it said,
Mhm.
women fighting, in from the, classical period. And I thought, there's so much that we don't have.
Mhm.
And like a small thing like this that looked like nothing, people, even in a museum, you kind of overlook it, you just keep going. So
Mm.
I guess if there isn't somebody holding a bit of a megaphone saying, hey, like, for a long time, people thought the Amazons were not real, that they were
Yes.
fiction. And now we know that they were real. And the Greeks knew they were real. They said so, but like early scholars were like, no, no, Plato's probably just it's probably a metaphor for something else. You know what I mean? So this is how you lose, this is how you lose knowledge. So yeah, you're right. With AI and with everything going digital, things can be erased. And generations from now, people might never know something that we take for granted.
Mhm. Why do you think the goddess had more temples?
Well, I think, um, again, the sacred feminine plays a key role. Here we're still talking about, even though it's a battle society in the sense that there were battles and wars, it's still an agricultural society. And so the fertility aspect, the sexuality in the sense of getting to the fertility, um, the natural aspect, worshiping nature, and the call, like I think ancient people 5,000 years ago were closer to the sacred feminine. They still had that call in their hearts. So when they talk about Persephone or the mistress of the underworld, they remember there's an echo that the underworld was ruled by a goddess, you know? And when they talk about the earth as Gaia, there's echoes. We still have that echo, thank God. That there's a divine feminine. So they were closer to that echo. And so I think it naturally worked for them to have these goddesses in charge of so much of everyday life. And then Zeus, you know, sort of as the leader, but he's always got Hera or someone else. There's always a little trinity going on, or he's got Leto and Artemis and Apollo.
Mhm.
You know, he does have some of his own temples, you know, and Apollo as well. Apollo's an interesting figure. I'm always torn about him because, of course, he's Artemis's brother, but I don't really like him. But he plays an important role um for that masculine aspect that becomes more and more what's the word? Like painted with the morality of the people writing about him. So by the time Ovid is writing about him in the Roman period, he's shaping him into whatever fits best with Roman morality. And for
Mm.
me, I feel like we lose a bit of that authenticity of that God by the time we get to the Romans. The Romans, especially as they move forward towards their demise, they perfectualize the gods into their own moral perfection, you know? So the gods lose a bit of their grit, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think it was just very, very natural that so much of the worship and the ritual had feminine aspects that that there are more temples for the goddess. And part of that is also if we count the temples of the gods that have goddesses also with them ruling in that temple, then we're really minimizing some of those temples. But unfortunately, I don't have yet, or maybe ever, because that is such an endeavor, the numbers for that. It feels to me like my work, what I'm doing is I'm creating a kind of statistic with the map. Um, but in the different cities that we are, where we find temples of Artemis, we also, of course, find temples of other gods and goddesses. And in those places that I visited, it's very, very clear that there are certainly more temples to Artemis than any of the other gods around. Although the mother of the gods is giving her a run for her money, Kybele. Um, and then the second layer to that is that there's definitely more female temples, female god temples than the male temples.
Yeah, I actually did not know that. That's really interesting. So, before we get into Artemis in particular, I would just love to know overall, now that you've been a scholar for quite some time in this area, what are some of the major takeaways as a modern woman you've deemed from your work studying this stuff?
Huh. Mm. Um, I think one of the toughest thing for me is dealing with the audacity of some of the male scholars. Academia, like any other field, any other, area of expertise, is built on often, the silencing of female scholars. I mean, Maria Gimbutas is a really excellent example that most people are familiar with. But I went to a conference just last year, I think it was, an archaeological conference, and there were two male scholars who were very excited about this exhibition they were putting on. It was called something like The Kings of Europe. I don't know if you saw the episode that I did it, but I did on it, but I did a whole episode because I had to rant forever, Amy, because I was so upset. And the king that I was piqued, my interest was piqued about the kings of Europe because they were talking about the Neolithic and they're talking about this Eastern European, which is sort of my history. And so my friend and I went to the exhibition, which was in Chicago. And as from the beginning, I realized that the labels were very, very purposely non-goddess, almost non-woman labeled. There is a collection of bird goddesses that sit around in a circle. It's a very old Neolithic collection. It shows up in several museums. They call them women just sitting in a circle talking with bird faces, but there were women. And as you go through this exhibition, the complete like ignoring of the women and the goddess and the shaman women, the priestess women, just became more and more and more and more enraging. And I wish I would have known, like, I wish I would have gone to the exhibition before I heard them speak, because when I heard them speak, they did a little like lecture promoting the exhibition, and I was really excited. I was like, oh my God, it's gonna be great. Da, 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 da. I wish I'd gone to the exhibition before. But I think the honest truth is that sometimes you're in a room with a bunch of experts, and there's a mood that if
Yep.
you stand up and go, hey, you know what? I went to your exhibition and it was quite skewed. Um,
Mhm.
there's a bit of a dismissal, a look down upon, on
Mhm.
that. However, I did the podcast episode because I did want to have something public with the name of this exhibition
Mm.
um out there. It was, I guess, my own little rebellion. I mean, I didn't want to really send this to them and be like, in your face, you guys, this was terrible. Because that's, unprofessional.
Yep.
But there's a couple aspects like that. It's very, very challenging. There's another one that I did on an artifact in the British Museum. Long story, but again, mislabeled. This artifact is called, like, almost looks like a monkey, and it's Inanna, the goddess Inanna. So dealing with that level of, like,
Mm.
also, ignorance,
Mhm.
blatant ignorance by people that claim to be experts
Yep.
has been the toughest for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Even like, when we talk about in our class about the whole breast thing, like, I get really like fired up because it's like we're all looking at the same material,
Mhm.
and yet you keep saying this even though it's wrong. And I don't know who to say it to have it permanently deleted. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I just can't help but think how this is across so many industries right now, like, medicine and just everything, like the party line. God forbid you question it. This is what we believe, it's like, that's nuts. Wow. How frustrating. Well, thank God at least you've got your little ice pick and you're outside trying to at least make a dent in the wall. Yeah, hopefully there'll be more people chiming in. Okay, let's get into our mutual love of Artemis. Um, Please tell us, if it's even remotely possible, in a nutshell, just your take on this goddess Artemis. What is it that you want the listener, the viewer, to know about her, and maybe anything that's not uh, as well known as you think it should be? We all know her as the goddess of wilderness and, childbirth and the moon and this and that. But please tell us your take on some of the key points you want people to know, as well as some of the lesser known points that you want people to know.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that comes up for me a lot, key point that's really important, is that she is all that we know and significantly more,
Well said.
right?
Yeah,
Significantly. I
perfect.
say that because significantly just is the impact on the culture um, that she had, that again was minimized and dismissed. Um, the numerous amount of temples and epithets and spaces that she embodies, from the underworld to the city to the wilderness to the sky to the enlightenment to literally anything that you to the archaic, and then if we're talking geographically, all the way through Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, um, people talking about her possibly being in the Balkans, which will be one of my future research. And so this widespread worship of her, widespread geographically and widespread temporally, in a way that almost feels a bit unimaginable right now,
Yeah.
because we've been for so long told the same party line: goddess, huntress, childbirth, and the wild. Yes, but also, you know,
Yeah.
hundreds of other names, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hundreds. And while this is not only for her, I mean, Aphrodite has lots of names, Athena has, this is not unique to her. What's interesting about her is that the expansion that she embraced goes unacknowledged and undiscussed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so for me, it's more than a passion. It really is a calling. When nuns talk about a calling or people talk about a calling, when I was younger, I was like, meh, no one's calling me, unless other than academia, right? Because I really like learning and I was a scholar. But I'm realizing that actually she has continually called to me to do this work. I remember when I was doing my PhD, because there was a time when I was thinking, I maybe I'll just go into real estate, because I mean there's just no way that I can feed my kids and take care of my family on it,
Yeah.
on what's going on in academia. And I went to a meeting and I was saying to someone, everywhere I go and every time I do something, I travel somewhere or I'm just hanging out with a friend, Artemis shows up in some way, a statue, someone says her name, someone does whatever, something random. And the person I was talking to looked at me and they went, Carla, like, that's not like the usual. Like, people don't just, that doesn't happen to everybody, you should really like think about that because that seems to be quite unique. And I was like, yeah, okay. Probably because I'm studying her. When you're doing something, it comes up a lot. And then I started paying attention to the randomness of these things, these signs. And as this was going on, I was also diving into the realization of how much broader and wider and more loved she was. And so I guess
Mm-hmm.
at some point that came together into my realization that, oh, actually, this is the purpose of my work and maybe of my life. Like, okay, I've raised my children and I've done all the stuff you're supposed to do. I've gotten the PhD, great, the house, whatever, lived. Yeah. But now I feel like the thing for me, just for me, because we all have something just for us,
Yeah.
seems to be her because I love doing it. Like I thought, and a lot of people who do their PhD, by the time they're done, they're like, I don't want to look at it again.
Yeah.
I don't want to look at this. I don't want to talk about this again. I spent, 7 years on it. It's done. But for me, I could live my entire life. If I found a patroness or a patron who would fund me going to these temples and mapping them and then sharing and, sharing it with the world and do whatever and going to museum. I could do that for years before I was full. Like, in my mind already, I can think, well, at least 5 to 10 years just to get these places done.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So it's something that I know comes from within. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's something that's like a tug. That's like a let's go, let's go, let's go.
What a blessing.
It is.
Hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
um,
It's beautiful.
especially because for so long I thought I just, I would just be
Yeah.
a professor and
Yeah.
a mom and I mean and those are wonderful things. Not those are bad things. I just didn't
Mm.
ever think that I would have a calling.
Yeah. Well, that pull.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. I love that. Oh my God, that's so inspiring. What a blessing. Um, okay, so the main takeaway I get is that I just, like I said in the beginning of the show, I had no idea that Artemis was as huge as she is and as prominent in all the different epithets, like you said, and really was just like wow, very eye opening to me. I'm so grateful I found your course. Um, let's talk about her transformations and reappearances through time, okay, which is incredible across what thousands of years, right? All the different iterations of society, and most importantly, how apparently she kind of transformed into the Virgin Mary. Which, hold on to your hats, everybody, because here we go. You've got to share this with us because that was like, I just literally like had to stop on my tracks when I first heard that idea. But it's kind of like, wow, wow, okay. Tell us
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So the most direct line, the
Mm-hmm.
the most direct line is Artemis of Ephesus and the Virgin Mary in Ephesus. So
Okay.
The Virgin Mary, we're told, settles with John, the disciple, in Ephesus. There's a home to her in Ephesus. She dies in Ephesus, we're told, though there are two stories to that. She either dies in Jerusalem or she dies in Ephesus, but these are the two places. And then, 400 years later, in 431, at the Council of Ephesus, she becomes Theotokos there, which is the Mother of God. So, in doing that, we see the fusion of Ephesus, who's the city of Artemis of Ephesus for 1,000 years, right? A city that is run by a goddess in every aspect: banking, political, emotional, festival, every aspect. The goddess Artemis is in their blood, in their identity.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the same city, the Virgin Mary controversially becomes the Mother of God. Because, of course, Greek Orthodox and Protestants, they don't like this idea of the Mother of God because it implies that the Virgin Mary is more than human because she's carrying a God. And to carry a God, you have to be something, not just your everyday woman, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
God.
right? And so, and then the symbolism, and in that fusion, the symbolism of things like honey, the aspect of virginity, though the Christians focus on the hymen, while the Ephesians focused on her not being married,
Mm-hmm.
right? The nourishment, the
Virgin.
caretaking of the innocent, of children, of etc. All of the Artemis's characteristics, aspects that she was a protector of and a governor of, bleed into or fuse with the Virgin Mary. So that's a really direct line. And so in my book that I just published in August,
Mm-hmm.
I trace that line in great detail, maybe more detail than I should, but in great detail so that you can really see how that happens. But then if you think about even Artemis the Huntress, she becomes Selene, right? So she has the moon on her head. She blends with Selene, she blends with Diana. She is a goddess of enlightenment, a goddess of light in the darkness, the protector of children. Those qualities also blend with the Virgin Mary,
Yep.
right? So
very
it
true.
depends. It depends on, like, so in Sicily, for example, where Catholicism is so powerful, Artemis was one of the main divinities there that was worshipped.
Oh.
In other parts of Italy, Diana becomes one of the primary goddesses, and then you could see the blend of that into the Virgin Mary. People sometimes say to me, well, okay, but the Virgin Mary has a child. Yes, as a virgin, like, I don't know how to me, it seems very, very easy to see this transition of a virgin goddess, Artemis, although, like I said, the word virgin is questionable, who protects children, and a virgin mother who has this one child and protects, all children as well. Lots of mothers pray to the Virgin Mary for the safety of their children. So that, to me, does not seem like a great jump. It's an adjustment because Christianity focuses on a male god. And so the Virgin Mary loses a lot of Artemis's sovereignty over herself, Artemis's justice and retribution. So the Virgin Mary becomes so almost like sterilized in some way, like some of the
And impotent.
yeah, impotent's a better word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. She doesn't get angry. She doesn't punish. So, but those are choices made for her, clearly, as she's
Yep.
being
Yeah.
developed.
There's no agency.
That's right. That's
Yep.
right.
Yeah.
And so I say that, like, Artemis is able to survive. Pieces of Artemis are able to survive through the Virgin Mary long enough that someone like me comes along, and others, many others, who look at the Virgin Mary and want to find her roots and bump back into Artemis.
Cool. Makes sense. Wow, that's just really mind blowing. I really got to do more of a deep dive on that. But that was very, like, wow, that's a thought. Like, my goodness. Imagine if that went mainstream. Ooh, because the more I've researched this over the years, Carla, the more it's like, I don't know how to, I'm going to try to say this very politically correct. The more that, because I grew up Catholic and Christian, obviously, and the more that I've realized, like, a lot of Catholicism was lifted off, quote unquote, the pagans. It's like Easter and like just, Easter eggs and Christmas, the story of the resurrection and the crucifixion. I mean, all this stuff was lifted off other religions based on the religions in which they persecuted, no less. And then they kind of took ownership of it. And it's just like, what? Like, I just feel like, and this is part of why I really dove into this more a few years ago, and just really devoted a lot of my time and effort on trying to share this with people. Like, people need to know this. Like, there was a lot of life before our modern times, and a lot of these beliefs that we have, and just a lot of this stuff is like, wait a minute, we don't have the right idea on where a lot of this came from, and it's really, I don't want to say upsetting, but like shocking, and then it's upsetting, and then it's like, wow. Wow.
It's true. I mean, I remember thinking when I learned or realized, I can't remember how it came about, but this idea that, there's no Christmas trees in Bethlehem.
Right.
And then looking back at myself, I was like, why did I never put that together?
Right.
I mean, why doesn't no one put that
I
together?
was just going to say that. No one does. Yeah.
No pine trees in Bethlehem. I mean, there wasn't, Why do we worship a tree? And why do we bring the tree in the house? And
Yeah.
then Easter, like you say, Easter, whole egg thing. My
Yep.
parents, who still kind of celebrate the Greek Orthodox Easter,
Yep.
more than the Catholic one, which is interesting. They do the colored eggs, and they do this thing. They do this thing with the eggs, okay? So you got the colored eggs, and you have to smash somebody else's colored egg. And so we go around the table, we pick an egg, and we go around, and you have to smash someone else's egg, and blah, blah, blah. It's kind of like a competition. Whichever egg doesn't get smashed gets to go on. But when you smash the egg, you have to say something. It's like in Romania, it's called Christos Înviat, like Christ is risen, let's say.
Oh.
And then the other person goes, Adevărat a înviat, which means like, it's right, you're right, he's risen. And then you smash the eggs. I've done this my whole life every Easter, okay? And it wasn't until too many years later that I said, why are we smashing eggs?
Yep.
Saying Christ has risen, like the symbolism of the egg as a
What's that all about?
feminine symbol.
Yep. Symbol of life. Yep.
What? What are we doing?
Yeah. Why are we smashing an egg?
And, I don't bring this up at the table because my mother would not like it.
God, no. God, no. Don't question. No.
But, and I play in the game, because it's something we've done.
Mhm.
But yeah, like these random, there's lots of things, these random things that are very pagan. And,
Which is so ironic, right? Because they're persecuted, and it's like paganism's this bad thing. And my understanding has been that it just means people of the earth, of the land, of nature. It's not demonic, but it has this innuendo of being demonic, kind of like the word witch or whatever. It's really like, wow. It's like amazing how terminology and neurolinguistics and all this stuff really controls beliefs and behaviors and attitudes. And it's really, they say, the sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's not right. We were taught that as kids, and that really is not true at all. Words are very powerful. It's fascinating. So, okay, as we get toward the end here, I can't even believe how time is flying by. Okay, so what I'd love to do is, I got two final questions. I don't want to throw this huge thing at you. Oh, first of all, I have to tell you something that happened to me before I get to those two final questions, because I think it's relevant to our girl, Artemis. So I'm up in New England, and I'm out I'm in the suburbs and I have a lot of wooded areas, which is part of why I live in the town I do, because it has a lot of conservation land and, preserved natural, beautiful like woods. And I go hiking with my dogs and all this stuff. 2 nights ago, I have 4 dogs and 2 were little and 2 were big. And 2 nights ago, 2 of my puppies got sick. They're always getting into trouble. So they must have eaten something during the day. And I woke up at about 3 a.m. to them being sick, the noise, whatever. So I'm cleaning it up. And, of course, I don't have much lights on. I'm up in the bedroom, 2nd floor, cleaning it up. And all of a sudden, I see out my window, I have a security light that came on. It's a motion detector. And I was like, oh, what was that? Like maybe a bird or something that set off the motion light. Carla, I look out the window. And all of a sudden, walking right down below my house, was an enormous stag at 3 a.m, pitch dark. I get breathless. I am telling you, this creature, it looked like a moose. It was enormous. I've seen deer my whole life. I grew up in New England. We see them all the time around here. Mostly the female, of course. I'd say 9 out of 10 are female. Very rare to see a male. This buck was huge. I mean, huge. I literally gasped for air. This is just like, if this isn't evidence of the divine. I mean, this creature took my breath away. It wasn't even that it was 3 a.m. It was just magnificent. It was just magnificent. And it walked across. So I saw the side body. So I get to see how massive this thing was. Biggest deer I've ever seen in my life. And it turned, and unfortunately I didn't get a good look at the face, but it turned its head back just enough on the angle that I could see the antlers. And I'm not a deer expert by any means, but I think this deer might have been probably about 8 years old, 7 or 8, because it didn't have an enormous rack, but it was the biggest I've ever seen. I just couldn't believe how huge this animal was. And it continued to walk, and then it hopped over my fence like it was a little pebble in its shoe, and it crossed over the creek. And I couldn't sleep for about an hour. I was so just blown away. Okay, so that was 2 nights ago. Then this morning, the day you and I record, I'm out early with my dogs. We go out almost every morning. We go for a little walk or hike or something. About 7:30 a.m. We're off trails on a hike. And don't you know, we're walking along and the dogs are all happy, la-di-da. And I look up and who's staring at me? But another buck. Another buck. Like, again, a male deer. You don't see male deer. Okay. Now, it wasn't the same one. We were several miles from my house and it was smaller, but this was more of a normal size that you would see. You usually see the younger bucks, it had the smaller antlers and it was much smaller, more of a normal size, but he was just staring at us. He didn't run away. He was just staring. I got 4 ducks. 2 of them are big shepherds. He was staring at us. And I quickly tried to distract the dogs and got them to go over there and whatever. And I was like, what is happening? I just saw 2 bucks within 48 hours. You don't see that, and particularly that huge, massive one in my yard. So I'm wondering if I'm going to see a third, because they say things happen in threes. I'm like, what's going on here? Am I trying to get a message? And I know the stag is a symbol of Artemis, which is crazy because I have you, the world's resident expert on Artemis, on the show. So it's just nuts. Okay. Do you have any thoughts on this crazy revelation?
That's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. And I know exactly what you're talking about. So I live in the forest too. I live 2 hours outside of Toronto, but the deer here for us, for some reason, they don't come out too much. So they're
Yeah.
shy. And I live here for some time and I barely see them, like almost never. I can count the times on my hand. And this summer I was going through some stuff, it's been a transformational year. And I had this moment. I was sitting out on my deck where I was like just talking to Artemis and just like, you know what, like I just can't, like I can't. I don't know what's going on. I can't. Anyway, we had this very candid, just give it to the goddess moment.
Heart to heart.
And the next morning, it was like 6 a.m., 5, 6 a.m., and I heard something in my backyard. And I knew, I was like, that is a doe. That I but I didn't wanna hope, right? Because I was like, "Oh my god, it could be a fox, it could be,"
Yeah.
and so I snuck up to my window, and there she was. She literally came right up to my house and was looking,
Wow.
and I I took out my phone, to sort of videotape this moment because I'd never seen anything like that, you know? Um, so and certainly there's never deer in my backyard, like, it's just not once. And so I think that there are moments when we need her, and there are maybe moments when she's reaching out to us, and the deer are the messengers. And so I don't know what it is that's going on with you.
Right.
Buck seems to
Two male
I mean,
deer.
I think that's one of those, like, did you get the message? You see the message? Are you seeing
Apparently
it?
not, because he came back. Well, not him, but like I'm like, what? What? Yeah.
Right?
Crazy.
So you'd have to look into that and see what that
Yeah.
means for you.
Yeah.
But I am certain that they are, messengers of the goddess. Yeah.
I love that. And how did you feel when the doe was there? Like
Oh,
what came to
so
you
even
first?
now when I think about it, it has become like a permanent fixture in my life that
Yep.
everything's okay. Everything will be okay. It was like,
Mhm.
for me, maybe because I'm a Capricorn, maybe because I'm an academic, I'm very left brain. I
Yep.
have a very hard time with, like, I don't remember my dreams.
Mm.
I doubt a lot of my experiences. I have a very hard time. So I think for me, an Artemis to communicate sometimes, it's a lot of faith rather than evidence. Lots of people have
Mm.
dreams. Lots of people have, like you said, deer. They have different messages. For me, that comes more rare.
Mhm.
But that moment this summer was so low for me, and that conversation and her coming the next day when I know I haven't seen a deer in 5 years,
Mm.
um, it was such a it like, I feel like every now and then she sends me a message that is so blatant
So clear. Yeah.
that says, like, "I'm here. Okay, maybe we don't get to communicate in the way that other people connect to her more easily, smoothly, but I took it as, 'I'm here. Everything will be alright. Just trust me.'"
Mm.
And, there's challenges, there's been challenges on and off since then, but I don't know, that moment was so clearly a message that it has given me a lot of, like, power and trust, in, everything will be alright.
I love that. I love that so much. And it's just no question that when you get something that's so obvious, like there's no way this is just a coincidence. I don't care what anyone says. To me, I've heard it called before a God wink or a goddess wink. Call it whatever you want, right? It's like I got your back, like I'm here and it's so clear. Like I love that. Okay, two final questions on the Artemis energy. How can what aspects of her energy, Carla, do you think are important for women nowadays to be aware of, tap into, know that's within themselves, call out, any of that stuff?
I think that strongest aspect is sovereignty. So,
Yes.
the ownership of self, um, and and, mm, and knowing that in our bodies, like feeling that sovereignty in our bodies, the unapologetic aspect of Artemis, um,
Love that. Yeah.
right? She makes
Love
her own
that.
decisions. She never apologizes.
I
Uh,
love that.
and she lives life like she wants it.
Mhm.
And that think for me, that is always the strength I reach for because we live in such a world in which the submission, the subjugation, the shame, all the S words, are so aimed at us, especially as women, but as humans. Um, and so much indoctrination of that, of fear, and even like humility. Like I grew up taught to be very, very humble. My mother would say, you're so pretty, but you don't know it. That's so good. It's so good that you're so smart, but you never show it, like in the sense of like, you never brag about it. That's so good. And
Yeah.
whatever, you're doing this, but and so there was always this like,
Mhm.
stay humble, stay small, be small. And
Mhm.
while I think, staying humble is good, and I mean, you don't, there's a balance. I think that Artemis has really pulled me forward to be like because I feel like Artemis is the kind of goddess is not looking for a humble servant. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like her entourage is filled with powerful women and playful women and beautiful, unapologetic women.
Mhm.
So that's like I once had this vision when we were doing this vision journey where anyway, you're supposed to go meet the goddess, you go meet the goddess, and my initial reaction when I see her is to kneel because I was very Catholic. You kneel.
Mhm.
And she reaches down to me, right? She goes, we don't kneel here, right?
Nice.
And I
Wow.
thought,
Okay. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
like, you know, so to have a
Wow.
goddess that allows you to be as
Mm.
big and as bright as you want,
Wow. Yeah.
right?
Mm.
Instead of like bowing to her and,
Mhm. Mhm. I'm not worthy. Yep.
right? Exactly, exactly. Her
I'm a
the
sinner.
kind of goddess, and the ancient gods were a lot like that. They didn't favor heroes for nothing.
Mhm.
They favored the cunning, they favored, the strong, they favored even some little injustices they did to win, like, they didn't care, they were like, "Yes."
Mm.
Um, so that has been a very important lesson for me, having grown up in a submissive religion, in a like I said, in a very humble household. Um, so I think Artemis is really bringing that back for us, like embracing your more, you know what I mean? Um, and yeah, that would be what I would hope that women tap into with her.
I'm so glad you brought up the word unapologetic. I mean, that is just one of the most important words that we can take away from her. And I call myself a reformed people pleaser. And let me tell you, unapologetic was a revelation for me over the last few years. And I'm just grateful I've lived long enough to get to that point. And I still have my moments where I'm being apologetic, but just even the concept, and even just to have the consciousness that I have lived, and most women do live most of their life kind of apologizing and caring what everyone else thinks and everyone else first and, whatever. So I just love that part about Artemis, and just the part, I think I've heard it called divine retribution, that she just, her justice is swift. And I love how she is the protectress of boundaries, not only in hers, but those whom she feels protective of. And that's another thing I've had to learn in becoming a reformed people pleaser, is those emotional boundaries, like, my goodness, we just violate them all the time. And so I'm right with you. Artemis is like the shit. Excuse me, but she is. Okay, so my last question for you is, you have said that the goddess is not a myth of the past, but a living presence within us, reminding us to honor our wildness, wisdom, and endurance in everyday life. I love that. Any thoughts to expand on that thought as we close out tonight?
Yeah, yeah. Um, People often say to me, "Oh, you worship Artemis like the ancient Greeks used to do this in mythology, almost like it's a fairy tale."
Mm-hmm.
Um, like it has almost no religious value because, the ancient Greeks didn't have religion, they had myth, which of course is a misunderstanding of translation because myth really just equals story. And anyways, um, so all stories are myths and all myths are stories.
Mm.
But I think it's more important than that. I think it's not just that I'm worshiping Artemis from the Greeks. It's that Artemis is alive in us. Like that humans create religion to explain the experience of the divine that we have naturally, right?
I like
That
that.
is,
Yeah.
we walk into a forest and we can't explain the overwhelming connection we have to a tree or a deer or a buck.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so we create religion, we sort of personify that to explain this feeling. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
if we take that backwards, then that means that that feeling, that divine connection is already in us, right? And so for me, Artemis as the representative of that connection um, is alive in us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not something that has to accept me. It's not even really external in many ways. I mean, I think we like to create external stories and external, because that's part of our imagination, that's part of our creativity. But really, when I really think about it, it's like it took me a long time to realize that Artemis and I are collaborating on this journey or are collaborating on this relationship. Like we are working together for me, really, to recognize my own divinity. Like Artemis knows her divinity. Like she doesn't need to do any of that, but she is the guide, the collaborator, the partner, the mentor that reminds us of our own divinity. And that has really nothing to do with myth. I mean, I think myth is just the reminder for us and the
Mm-hmm.
evidence in a patriarchal world that, hey, look, there was a time when we had all these gifts. Let's look into that. So myth is like the trigger, that reminds us. But the truth
Mm-hmm.
is that we are the divine, um, and we don't actually need external validation or external anything really um, to carry the goddess with us.
And I think to your point, that's why the nature of myth is, transcends culture, time, place, gender, ethnicity, all that, because there's something within us that resonates with it, and it's the familiar, because it's just it is our being. That's what it's all about. Like all these stories are, again, they just transcend everything. So,
It's powerful because, that saying that's going around that you're not a human having a spiritual
yeah,
experience, you're the spirit having a human. But if
yeah,
you said that 20 years ago, you'd be
right.
laughed out of school.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
the fact that that has come into our mainstream, that we all know it and feel it as right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think even something small like that really shows the conscious change.
That's a good point. I agree. You're right. I like to think about that. Even when I was in, high school, college, if that came up, you would definitely get the eye roll. Yeah. Wow. Well, it gives you hope to where we might be 20 years from now, Carla.
It really does. It really does. When I see some of these things and I see how much we're using that in our language and even
Mm-hmm.
language of spirituality that we're
Yep.
doing, and like, I just think that is the true revolution. The
Yep.
revolution, right, is
Back
quiet.
to the body. Back to,
Yeah.
yeah, spirit. Yep. It's true. Even just the whole term mind body. Any final thoughts to make you feel complete?
I hope this resonates with people. And my hope is that they become curious about Artemis even more than they were before. And yeah, and that this continues the conversation that we keep talking about it. Yeah.
I love it. And you've got so many wonderful resources of education. Can you share with us what those are? And those are in the show notes, everybody, if you're busy and you can't write it down at the moment.
So I have the Artemis Research Center, which is the sort of virtual temple of Artemis, but also a school. So in there, we've got a group that meets monthly for a free workshop, and then there's lots of courses. As you know, we've got live online courses and then self-paced courses, and then I've got a blog called In Search of Artemis, where I just blog a lot of the adventures at the sites. And what else? Just social media stuff if everyone's interested. Everywhere at Artemis Expert. This is where I like to post videos and just artifacts from the museums. because I really love for everyone to see them, because I'm so excited when I see them in a museum, especially obscure museums where I'm like, oh, I have to share this. What else? And then the Goddess Project podcast, which is on YouTube, where I just rant about goddess things.
It's great. It's so educational. It's entertaining. It's well done. It's just, I love it. That's one of my favorite podcast channels. Thank you so much, everybody. I know you've enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you over at the Artemis Center, maybe in some of the courses. And I just am excited for you to learn about Dr. Carla's work and just be involved and have it expand your being and be unapologetic like the rest of us. Yahoo, here we go. Okay, well, Carla, thank you so much again. This has been so amazing. I'm so grateful to have you on the show. And everybody, please check out the show notes and please share the show with others that you think might need to learn how to be unapologetic as well. And we'll see you next time on Awakening Aphrodite.